Thank you for kicking out the Trojan horse.
Yeah. Right. Let's get started. Welcome everybody to the January 27th SIG Multicluster call. And so today on the agenda we have two items. The first one is the placement decision PR, but Mike, if you don't mind, I'd like to skip to the main topic, which is removing service import, because Tim can spare a few minutes for us today.
Sounds good,
All right.
please.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, so I don't really have anything to share on screen, but for those of you who haven't been following the mailing list, after Arthur sent the email about graduating to, well, the MCS API to beta, Tim sent an email saying maybe we should think about actually whether service import is really required, and if it might not be worth thinking about removing it in the interest of having a spec that specifies what we need, but nothing more. And so there was some discussion about that. And actually, Tim's just been over, since you've just been over the thread, maybe you can summarize things as you see them.
Yeah, so I apologize for like last minute like pigeon programming the problem. It's something that I've been thinking about for a while, but I haven't been able to like really concentrate on and put deep thought into. Um, I've spoken to a few folks over the years. God, it's embarrassing to say that. Over the time that MCS has been in alpha, for folks who've done implementations or would possibly do implementations, including mesh stuff. And the question has always sort of nagged at me of is the way we do import the right way to do an import? Like what problem does it really solve? Does it solve that problem the best way for that problem? And I have had a really hard time convincing myself that it is the best implementation. It seems fairly natural extension of the way we've always done things. But the concerns that came to me were two, and I just hit those in the mailing list, so I apologize for late jumping in. The one problem is if you assume you want sort of everybody to have access to everybody's exports, you want to build effectively a mesh, but you want to do it through some MCS implementation, somebody has to go and create namespaces in every cluster. And that's a pretty high privilege operation. If I know that the X team is not supposed to run in cluster Y, but I have to go create the X team's namespaces there, that feels something about that feels wrong to me. It feels like a potential vulnerability or like we're cutting off a potential signal that could be interesting. And I don't know, which actor is responsible for creating all those namespaces. If you assume a fair large number of clusters, 100 clusters or something, who is empowered to do that action, and what privilege does that come with? And then the second part was, are there reasonable implementations that don't need it at all, or only have to do it because the specification says they have to do it? And I'm not sure, but I feel like I could implement it at a mesh layer, like with all the ambient stuff, which I'm not super familiar with. But it feels like I could implement a full MCS solution based on DNS resolution that doesn't need service import. And so that's what led me to sending my email. Now, my take on it is I haven't convinced myself that I'm right. The conversation has been useful. Like I forgot Core DNS, of course, uses that for its way of resolving names. And Gateway API refers to service imports directly. So those 2 points are very good. I've always found service imports relationship to Gateway to be a little bit clunky. I don't have an answer to the DNS one.
Right, thanks. Yeah, and another aspect that's, well, feels important to me is that service imports is also where condition statuses are added to give information about things that are going wrong. And it's easier to put them there in some cases than have them on service export. But yeah, Laura, go for it.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm not in my normal setup, so just double checking. But yeah, less or so to the second point about like are there reasonable implementations that don't need it all, and also like what is its purpose? I feel that like philosophically, I guess its purpose is to have like a cluster local like representation of and like place for all of the metadata. I mean, by definition for that service import. And I think like most directly as core DNS as an example is so that like tooling that's cluster local like has a reliable location where that metadata can be surfaced. And so I think the role of like the standard is to like make the ability for other ecosystem things to build on top of it. And I feel like we've been assuming, and again, Core DNS is an example, that there will be tools that need that information cluster local, like organized per service that's imported. So I feel pretty strongly that that is like the role of the standard, even if it's possible for implementations not to. I do think that like it's still our obligation to provide that as long as we like agree that that is like useful. But I think that it is. So yeah, that's like my feeling about that one. For having to create namespaces in everybody's cluster and how that feels wrong or is cutting off a potential signal. By potential signal, do you mean like if there is no namespace in someone's cluster, then we know that like that people who have deployment privileges in that cluster shouldn't be hanging out? Is that the type of signal you're talking about?
Yeah, exactly. The absence of a namespace is a very clear indication that nobody's using anything bad in that namespace, that it hasn't been compromised or abused or forgotten or mismanaged, that it has to exist just to hold a thing that no user actually touches feels weird.
Yeah. I get the feels weird part. Um, this like decision kind of predates me, but I got the sense that it was to, and I mean, you were there, so I guess you know, but to reiterate, or what I perceive of it is that it seemed like it was trying to leverage like the tools that are in like vanilla Kubernetes basically. And like there was a strong separation between like service meshes are in this category of like a layer on top of everything. And MCS is the thing that does some of that stuff, but in the in between using what we have inside of Kubernetes. Um, so, I mean, that feels like the meaning behind it. I think, like, on the point of potential signal, like, we could possibly argue it the other way that, like, the fact that the namespace is there in a world that's using MCS means that the people there want a service from the other thing. So, I don't know which of those two signals is more important, if that's, like, um, relevant. But I think I think there's a lot of at least assumptions baked into some explicit, some less explicit in the cap about who is empowered to do that action. So if we like proceed, I don't know if we've fully addressed, but if we pretend that like the cutting off the potential signal is okay or whatever, then I think like some of the assumptions that were written in the cap is about like that there is like basically anybody who has namespace admin, like the privileges to make namespaces in other clusters obviously has the power to then import services into that cluster leveraging MCS by definition. And also that in situations where there's like lots of clusters, like tooling or automation to even like auto apply them are possible or of interest. And that seems to me to have been like the context that like is provided, at least by us, of who is empowered to do that action. So I don't know if that like is sufficient to what your concerns are. So anyways, just want to talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, my concern is, I admit, it's a little bit nebulous. I don't know if we have any other abstractions that require the presence of a sort of inactive namespace in a cluster. If so, then maybe it's just fine, and I'm making a deal about nothing. And I don't know what the alternative, honestly, what a good alternative would be. Like, I guess we could make the imports all go into an administrative namespace and have everybody pull it out of there. I'm not sure that's actually better.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds better for the like cutting off potential signal question, but I don't think it addresses your who is empowered to do that action. And then it also, like, we would need another thing to, on the importing side, I guess, for them to indicate like which one they want.
Yeah, I mean, imagine for a moment, just at risk of solutioning too deeply, like there's a service imports designated namespace, and the implementation, instead of creating the service import in the in the foo namespace for a service under foo, it creates it in this administrative namespace and has a field that just says, and this goes into that other namespace there, which makes names more complicated, makes, it's a weird pattern. The advantage there is whatever the MCS implementation doesn't need to be empowered to make namespaces, and there's no other actor that needs to synchronize all namespaces across all clusters. That is the primary win of it, but it comes at the cost of a weird pattern that I don't know if we have any other existence proof of.
Yeah, just for reference, that's how Submariner used to do it a while back. It just imported service imports into an administrative namespace, and DNS resolution, well, service discovery was based on that. And we fixed it to match the spec.
When you
so
say
it is
fixed,
possible.
do you mean
Yeah.
fixed as in the sense it's better, or fixed as in the sense of you cut its what's off?
Yeah, I haven't really thought of whether it's better or not. It was just aligned with to align with the spec. This is, I think we did it when we started working on the conformance suite for MCS API.
It makes complete sense. It's just, now with the benefit of some hindsight, it's unclear which pattern. They both have some warts.
Yeah.
The question is, which warts are worse?
Yeah. Yeah. Arthur. Yeah, you were first.
Well, I mean, what I'm going to say is more on implementation details and or like side effects. But for instance, in Cilium, we have a derived service per service import, and because it's in the same namespace and all of that, technically you could use the service directly, which is underneath. So if we move the service import to another namespace and the derived service that go with it, we lose this like hack for user that could just bypass the service import and use that for, I don't know, controllers that do not support yet the service import. It feels more like it's a hack. Just a disclaimer, but yeah.
I mean, using a service to implement multi-cluster service is a cute hack, but it's not a required thing. It's not part of any specification, right?
Yeah.
And therefore, the name of it, I mean, you have to be careful when you're creating a name service in a user's namespace. You have to make sure that the name doesn't collide with anything that the user might reasonably want to do, which makes it not a very useful name, right?
I mean, we retain all the labels. So if you are a controller that selects service based on label, you could like do it in a reliable way. Like with Prometheus operator, you could already do it. I haven't tested it, but it's the main use case that I see it. Otherwise, I don't have any other use case, to be honest, but yeah.
Yeah, that's my problem too. Like the use cases are very thin, sort of in both directions. And before we go to, I mean, we can still change things after beta, right? But beta sort of cements the ideas. And so I just wanted us to give it some thought as to whether the alternative approach or an alternative approach might make sense. I do not have a strong opinion. Please do not take this as me saying we did it wrong, we should change. It is sort of last chance to ask the question.
Rob?
Okay, I wasn't sure if I was, you know, in Tim's spirit of last chance to ask the question, one of my concerns about the current shape of the API is that it is so tightly coupled with the service API, which is something that we've been trying to decouple. You know, we've been trying to split out, and it feels like at the same time we're saying stop adding things to service, you know, start, you know, splitting things apart. We're effectively adding more to service indirectly, right? I mean, yeah, that's maybe not the best thing, but is there a path that I'm missing that would enable this API or an API shaped roughly the same way to support other kinds of backends? You know, I know I've come here before and talked about what we're doing with inference, you know, gateway inference extension for multi-cluster, and we ended up roughly following the same pattern that's used here, but that feels not great. You know, like we have inference pull import now, right? Which is like, you know, and you know, over in working group AI Gateway and the agentic net stuff, there are other backends being developed, and so it feels like we're just kind of like, you know, digging a hole for ourselves, unless we can find that solution to have an API that provides this level of functionality, but is not quite as tightly coupled with the service API. That doesn't necessarily mean a net new API. It just like that's a problem I'd like to find a solution to.
Yeah. So Laura, you had your hand up next, but maybe there are other hands that have gone up that are responses to Rob's
I
point.
will cede to responses to Rob's point. Though I have a response to Rob's point too, I guess.
Well, you start then.
Okay, I'll do brief response to Rob's point and then put my hand down and put it back up for something else later. But yeah, I think like it literally is multi-cluster services. It's so connected to the service API. It was like designed to be an extension of the service API. Like that seemed like the core like driving goal of it. I think it originates from a time and coexisted in development for a long time, like before I feel the like as far as I perceived it, the attitude towards like get away from service API became very strong. So I feel like they are from the same era, I guess. So I think it would be, I actually think it would be like a lot tougher to take a angle of can we expand multi-cluster services to encompass everything else than it is to what can we make that encompasses everything in the world that we are now. And I love tradition and standards. So like normally I feel like I wouldn't say that, but I think like in this like case, like there it was too originally coupled to that the service API standard, which I think was, you know, it sounds like it was more important then. It's still important, of course, but like important to build off of then. I'm not sure that like with its inertia and trajectory that it's reasonable to like back out of that. I think we can definitely learn stuff from it and borrow some stuff from it. So yeah, that's kind of like my take on that to some degree. And then I will cede to other responses and come back for my other point later.
So I agree with everything that Laura just said. It definitely stems from a time when service was somewhat less in disfavor. Although being in disfavor in the sense that, you know, I got up on stage and made fun of it, is different than actually having a workable replacement for it, which we don't yet, right? And I'm not pointing any fingers in particular, but we've talked about cluster IP gateways as a potential off ramp for services, but that doesn't exist yet. Like that work has just not been able to come to fruition yet. In that sense, service is the best option as an abstraction because there's nothing better, like pragmatically. I'm curious, Rob, if you could hand wave and have you know gateway as the predominant API for describing the way into things. What would a multi-cluster gateway API that let traffic into stuff across clusters be, with especially emphasis on the thing that I think is best about MCS is how easy it is to say, I want this thing to participate in the global thing, right? The service export, I think, is a really slick way of doing that. It's sort of low information, but it's also low overhead. Can you imagine a better way of doing it? And I say this having looked at some proposals for things like composite backends and other things that don't seem to have traction yet.
Yeah, I mean, that is, you know, Alan and I have come to other meetings with this idea, which I would agree does not have traction yet, of, you know, basically what would a gateway-focused multi-cluster backend look like? Because what I hear, at least with my like gateway view of the world, it, you know, in tow, is that a fair number of people of users do not want all the things of gateway users do not want all the things in MCS. They just want to be able to describe a multi-cluster backend. And the endpoint propagation, DNS name, whatever, is just adding, you know, config latency, complexity, etc., to their systems. So you know that's the, you know, idea we threw out there. I'm not particularly tied to it, but you know if and I'm not saying like maybe it, you know, maybe it's true that these are just different things, because I'm looking at the view of the world with, you know, gateway colored lenses, whatever, you know, on, and so what I see is this world where you have a way that you can describe whatever kind of backend, whether it's, you know, I want to group, you know, inference pools together. I want to group services together. I want to group, you know, I don't know, AI gateway backends together. It allows you to group things together. I think another thing that isn't quite part of the proposal, but something that I'm hearing in this discussion, is maybe it would also be useful to revisit the idea of namespace sameness. But I know that's a whole can of worms to open up there. So I don't know. I don't want to get in the way of something that is clearly working. I just want to kind of raise, you know, is there a way that what we have already that works could shift in a few ways to make it work more nicely for gateway, or should we consider like just service import, service export goes one direction and gateway stuff goes another direction, and then just kind of like are their own worlds? I don't know. I've lost track of who has the next hand.
Arthur has the next one.
Oh, okay. So about like having a generic resource, I think one of the nice property of like service import is that you can see all the resulting of all your possible conflict in all your clusters. And as a user, you can check the service import and see all those property resolved. And I don't think you would be able to do that in probably any way with a generic resource. If you have some kind of generic export, maybe, but then you would have to have a specialized resource for importing if you want to retain that, probably. Or you don't auto-create some service import like I think like the composite things, I don't remember exactly the name, sorry. But your composite proposal does, like it doesn't auto-create, so it's fine. You could have the resulting properties inside the status, but if you do that, it's not generic also. So I think if we have to be generic, we necessarily drop a number of properties of MCS right now, I guess. Yeah. But we could potentially improve the API, for instance, to have, I don't know, a way that you do not want to request a cluster IP or something if you just want to have gateway API. But I'm not sure of if we can do anything else. Yeah, it was a lot of things mixed together, sorry about that. But yeah, that was my take.
Maybe me.
Right. So I think it was me, unless you want
Oh
to
yeah,
respond
you go.
to
You go.
Rob or Arthur. Yeah. Yeah. So my overall take on all this is that maybe it's a bit. So I know this is the last chance to think about these things, but maybe it's a bit late to make big changes to the spec, given that we do have implementations that rely on things like service imports. So I agree the namespace sameness is something we need to keep. But I also like the idea of taking the lessons from MCS and lots of other things, and maybe working more on some other thing that could represent something like what Rob's been looking for, a sort of like a generic export. And so I've been thinking about that for the past couple of months, and I'm sort of leaning towards perhaps more something like a binding than just an export import, something where you can say in one cluster I want to bind to something in another cluster. But anyway, we can have that discussion later. Yeah, but basically what I'm saying is I think MCS is imperfect. We know that. I'm not sure we can actually fix it, or if it's worth spending the time fixing it rather than coming up with something else more generic and more generally useful.
I guess my question there would be like, if we think we're going to do something else, like it's fine if we say that something else we're going to do is just going to be for gateway, or for that ecosystem, and this is going to be for service, and these are going to be completely disconnected things. What I'm nervous about is that we push this forward while still knowing we're going to push something else forward, and maybe they overlap, and so we have like V2 coming out as at the same time as we're like pushing for like that's the if we say they're just disconnected, I think that's okay. But
yeah, you want to avoid pushing something will be deprecated straight away.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess that makes sense as well. If we know MCS is going to be replaced by something, but I don't think we do. Tim or Laura, I'm not sure.
I feel like Tim has a direct response, and my brief also direct response is I don't think personally I don't think I don't think that MCS would be deprecated right away. I don't think Service API would be deprecated right away. Like I think there's actually a pretty long runway where we're working together on what's next. So I don't think that's like a concern at all. So yeah, that seems like super solvable as long as we keep connected. And as I understand it, like MCS, like Service API was very like mature, and then MCS was building on top of it. And so we could approach the next thing as like, well, SIG Network, tell us what the next big thing is, and we'll make a multi-cluster version of it. That's one way, which has its own lead time. Or it could be like, let's work together to describe what the new thing that's like service and how like that intersects with our thing. I think that's a little bit tendrily of how it's going now, but not like super serious. And maybe there's some variance on the inside, but either way, I think that process will take time. And I think we could, with clear eyes, decide how we want to intersect using the way that MCS grew up, which, you know, was like in more of the sequenced order, as whether that's a good idea or not for this next thing. But now I will cede back to Tim for his response.
You kind of derailed my thought.
Sorry.
No, in a good way. I agree. Like, I'm not worried about putting something out that's sort of pre-deprecated. That's not my concern. My concern is primarily around: are we imposing this? Oh, shoot.
All right, roll the tape. So roll the B-roll. Can I say my thing now?
Yeah.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay.
I apologize. Sorry about that. My
No,
son
he's back.
called.
Never mind.
Sorry, my son called, and usually if he calls from school, it's an emergency. It was not an emergency. Tickets are on sale for a concert that he wants me to go buy tickets for. That's what the emergency was. I'm concerned primarily with the establishment of this pattern that you must create the namespaces to do the import, to consume things from other services. That is the one thing that sticks in my brain as, that feels kind of clunky. And truthfully, like if we put it all in an administrative namespace and admit that Submariner was right in the first place, then I don't see how we answer Rob's other question, like what is the sort of more general form? How do you export an inference gateway that you're going to then multi-cluster that? Do we require that go into the same administrative namespace, a different administrative namespace? Does it have a different pattern? I don't think we know. This is ultimately the intersection for me of like, if we crystallize this pattern, then everybody's going to follow it, right? Like that's just the way things work. And maybe that's fine. And I just want to go into it with eyes open. So I'll make this the last thing I say. I'm going to have to drop off. But I'm fine if we decide we looked at it, we thought about it, we decided there's no obvious pattern that is better than this, and the inertia is worth just going with. Cool, I'm good with that. At least we can say we asked the questions.
Thanks for segueing to what I wanted to say anyways, which was to come back to Tim's original 2 points. So I feel like there's the Tim's 2 points, and then there's Rob's like bigger, more nebulous point. And I feel like Tim's 2 points are like direct comments on the MCS API as it is today, and Rob's points are more tied. I mean, both of them a little bit, but more tied up with the future and moving parts related to Gateway API and like inference pools, blah, blah, blah. So I feel like we're kind of trending for Rob's point that like we need to think of like a new like way to intersect probably something new on from the multi-cluster side together with that. If that's kind of what I'm getting from that. I feel like we talked a little bit about Tim's second point on the mesh layer. So yeah, so I want to get finally back to the namespaces in everybody's cluster thing, which is what Tim just brought up again. Anyway, sorry if there's a bunch of background noise. I'm getting construction done in my house. But okay, so I don't I think we can write all these things down and I don't know, decision doc or call it whatever you want so that there's like a durable artifact that people can like look at and remember things that will probably help. But I think that the fact that namespaces from like other quote unquote teams or groups or whatever are in like clusters they don't have deployment privileges is fine, is like good maybe, because we are saying that things that are deployed in that cluster have a dependency against things that are in that namespace. Those things are not in that cluster necessarily, but they are in that namespace in another cluster. And the reason we imported it here, like the reason that we made this namespace in here is because something in this cluster does have a dependency on services that are being exported from wherever that other namespace is. Like there is actually like a connection between those two is what we're saying. And I think that signal can be preserved if people don't like auto import everywhere, if that's like important to them. If they do auto import there, like that's a convenience thing, you know? So I think by necessity, it wipes like the convenience of things will wipe away some like signal. I think the means by which people can do that, like I think there's ways to automate it or to like apply a policy on top so that it's like clear, at least to somebody who has access to and understands the way that the policy is like defined, who actually has deployment privileges in which cluster versus who just has like whose applications have dependencies on that team's stuff in other clusters. So yeah, that's my like direct, I guess, like feeling on that. And so I would not like change the dependency on having namespaces like required to like import because I think it is meaningful. I think it's philosophically consistent. And I think that it leverages the tools that like vanilla Kubernetes has like better than this, at least this direct alternative we're talking about with the centralized namespace, which I feel makes it much more complicated and unclear. Okay, I think that's everything I wanted to say. The
There's no more hands, so I don't know who who should
Yeah,
say
well,
what.
you're unmuted, so you might
Okay,
as well.
I was thinking about it, but I wasn't sure if someone was gonna. Okay, yeah, no, I think those are good thoughts. I feel like I'm adding my own noise to this. So maybe the easiest way to keep track of all these, various thoughts is exactly what you suggested. Have it in a decision doc as an artifact where we can all kind of look through and show, the pros and cons that we weighed, and where this fits. I definitely don't want to be in the way here. I just want to find a way, selfishly for this, for some kind of multi-cluster thing to work for the various types of backends Gateway has. And I don't know if it's this API or not. The other thing I'll ask, this is more of just a question because I haven't been paying as close attention. Are you trying to add conformance tests before it goes to beta, or what's I know we talked about conformance tests in a previous meeting I was in, but I haven't kept up. that
No,
goes
no,
through.
there is a bunch of conformance states. Our main question was how we collect them for implementations,
Cool. Okay.
which is something track for stable, more not beta.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. He's just saying in the chat that he has to drop. And yeah, we'll have to follow up this up on the mailing list. Yeah, maybe well, either me or Tom, we can look back at what Submariner used to do, just to see if that could make sense. But Laura, do you take your point about the value of having per namespace service imports? Right, I'm not sure there's much more to say. I'll go over I didn't keep up and take notes, but I'll go over the recording once we have it and summarize the discussion in the mailing list so we can continue the discussion there. So going back to the agenda, maybe, unless somebody else has something they want to add on this topic. No hands, I'll take that as a no. So the placement decision PR in the scrub, that's the implementation of the changes, well, the placement decision KEP, which was merged a while back. So thanks, Mike. It's been through a couple of rounds of review already. I've approved it because I think it's good to go, but it needs a separate pair of eyes on an LGTM. And Laura wanted to start a discussion about SIG multicluster release machinery in the 15 minutes we have left.
Yes. I think it will be kind of short. I just wanted I'd like put this on at the last second. But yeah, so we have talked a little bit over the past like 6 months, maybe to a year, about possibly needing more release machinery for SIG MC projects as they move towards being like, as some of them move towards being like libraries or like other things besides CRDs. There's a particular case where there's this issue where someone is looking for like a published Docker image that has the secret reader plugin already in it. So this is a doc that's kind of like pulling together some of the notes of that, some background about like current like Kubernetes support for SIGs releasing software and kind of like the status of the current SIG projects regarding like what they even do. In general, from what like I think is that for all of the projects that need to have some sort of release or like to onboard all of our projects onto have working in this release system, we need everybody at some point, if they want to leverage GitHub releases with some sort of semantic versioning and likely have some sort of like build or tagging process that's like well defined to do that, so that it's easy for us to release also in the same repos Docker files that can build that artifact. And then from what I understand most recently, there's actually this like directions basically of how to get images that are built into like a staging and then official repo from like the Kate's IO perspective. But it will be our responsibility to like handle the machinery that knows at what time to like pipe things down that process. And then I think we also need to like have some ideas as a SIG of how we want to communicate releases and to whom, to what subset of people when those things happen. There's a couple questions here about if anyone cares about images being in a different image registry besides Docker, which I'm also accepting comments on from the group. But anyway, so that's what's being discussed. If anybody here who is a owner of any of the, or like longtime contributor to any of these other projects, wants to like help work on this and integrate, that would be great. Any general comments too about like how we specify this process, either as a SIG or per project. And then my priority is basically this cluster API or cluster inventory case because it's being directly asked for. But if there's something else that should be on like the high priority list in somebody's mind, then please tell me or open an issue or something. And that's kind of what I wanted to say. I don't know if any multi-cluster runtime folks are here, but that's in like a more like has some more release scripting. MCS API is like pretty manual, and those are our two current cases. So if we want to integrate together or have things be more unified across the SIG, just want to point out that those are the most mature release, and then would love to talk to the folks of multi-cluster runtime about what they need or don't need from something like this. So that's that. Any comments, concerns, or questions?
Rob, does Gateway API publish any container images? I know Gateway API doesn't provide an
Yeah.
implementation, but for
I
conformance tests
mean,
and stuff like that, maybe?
that's why we publish images exclusively for conformance tests. I think we have 2 different echo servers, which is a fun, history where one has much more functionality than the other, but we publish 2, and it's annoying but not awful.
And is that just in a Gateway API specific org on Docker Hub, or
No. So there's a whole bunch of Kubernetes infra for publishing images. It's I want to say it's hidden under test infra or some place like that.
And Laura had found it.
Honestly, yeah, okay. Yeah, so basically
Yeah, Ben helped me find this.
the only thing I've done before to make
Oh,
it
yeah.
make sense is I go through the blame on one of the things under registry, Kates.io, and then I look at, what PR added this, and that PR usually references the other, repo that because there's like at least 2 repos you need to change. And I don't know, maybe this documentation is complete, but in the bad old days, I basically just had to look at what other people had done and try to figure it out. And it looks like documentation has gotten mostly better. So
yeah, I was warned this might be stale, but should have some shape that is similar to the thing. But yeah, good to know that you fought that battle in the past. And there's a Git blame with your name on it that I could even track down if it comes down to it. But yeah, I think some of the stuff here about like how to get the infrastructure so that we're using the official like registry.kates.io, and there's like a staging to prod like promotion thing is like in here, but I think it's still up to us to handle making sure that we can do like all of this first stuff to even like get the image, and then I think we can feed into that's where this like process then picks up that is detailed, and that's like what gets it into a like Kates.io registry, and then maybe that's sufficient. Like we don't need to push it anywhere else. That would be great. I don't even know if it pushes, exactly where that's hosted or how sharded it's hosted or whatever. I'm not sure. We're going for super like big coverage here. And then I'm actually very open to hearing what your communication tactics are Rob or elsewhere. I don't think that comes for free with any of this either.
No, that's for sure. I mean, we have automatic builds of Echo server images now. So that, I guess that's the other thing, is it's built into our post submits, that images are built automatically, and then tagged automatically on release. Yeah, that was a pain to set up. With that said, it doesn't, what we're really looking for, like, the images themselves aren't the star of the show. What we really care about is feedback on the conformance tests, which rely on those images. And so in that case, what we're, the real feedback mechanism is conformance reports. If we get conformance reports from implementations, that suggests that our conformance tests are working. And if we don't, they're not. I mean, that hopefully we're getting some feedback from implementations, but the key thing here is that the interested audience is not users of the API, it's implementers of the API. And so that's a smaller and more manageable list.
Right, thanks. Yeah, it's useful feedback anyway.
Sorry, yeah, taking notes, but thank you. Okay. Well, anyways, this project is happening in the background, and let me know if you are interested about anything. Thanks.
Thank you, Laura. And that's the end of the agenda. So unless anybody has anything to talk about in the last 5 minutes, apparently not, we can end there. So have a good rest of the week. See some of you on Thursday in the APAC call, maybe. Otherwise, it'll be next week.
Bye.
Bye, thanks.
Bye.